thank you for being here this afternoon. This is the second part in a 4-part series of our Go Home, Go Big or Go Home. Yes, I know the irony here. Series from our mentor advisor program here at the Village. We started off this is actually our 3rd year, and we started off with just basically a part-time person and a handful of mentors, and now we have 30 very well curated, very experienced and empathetic mentors and advisors. Our mentors are pretty much in the position of helping entrepreneurs in the long term, and our advisors are subject matter experts who can help you with much more tactical matters. And so, what we're hoping to do is really just change the social proof of mentoring. It's been a lost art. It's one of the reasons when after I sold my company, we came back. You wanted to help entrepreneurs, and one of the things that's become critical in terms of thinking bigger, having larger exits, making Atlanta's ecosystem. We're now the top 10 ecosystem in the United States. How do we push even higher? And one of the factors that I wanted to contribute to that was bringing back the idea of mentoring and then developing that relationship over time. So today we're going to be tackling the second part, which is reframing, the idea of, well, you are dreaming bigger, but how can you think bigger? What are the areas that most entrepreneurs are finding themselves in a stagnated period, or perhaps are not accelerating enough to break through? And I fortunately have some great panelists with us today. We're going to be talking about it. All the way to my right is Guillermo Sonheim. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I always get it wrong. We always get our names wrong together. And he is the CEO and founder of Blue Marble Exploration, amongst many other ventures that he's about. He has been a mentor among mentors. He's really taught me particularly about how having a mentor that's empathetic is extremely important, particularly when growth is important from an EQ standpoint, as well as understanding how to truly help an entrepreneur at various stages. So he's been a guiding light for me as well. And then to his left is Tyler Scriven, who is the co-managing director of Techstars Atlanta. He's one of the first people that actually got me down this path of we really need to focus on the ecosystem, thinking larger about, or having mentors help a lot of the entrepreneurs thinking bigger. One of the notions I remember we had a conversation about is how do you accelerate fast enough to break through to the next barrier, not just simply going through the motions and assuming that things are going to happen. And I think he places a great deal of emphasis on how mentors can help with that particular aspect of it. And then to my right, of course, is Rachel Orston. So this is literally the second time we've actually met. She and I worked at Silverpop in the past, and one of the things that I got to know her through was through Bill Nussey, as well as through her reputation in terms of validating something for me that even in times of stagnation, there needs to be an opportunity to explore and new revenue options, new ways of thinking, bringing the right people in to push through. So I'm so glad that you're here and be able to take this time at the end of the quarter. So today, Rachel is the CEO of User IQ, customer success platform. I think I got that right before. And
customer growth platform.
Customer growth platform. Thank you very much. So I'm really glad to have all of you here. Thanks so much for taking the time. The format for today's, after all this intro, we're going to talk through some questions for about 30-35 minutes, and then we're going to pretty much open it to you all and have a nice little intimate chat about whatever you'd like to talk about. So I thought we'd start with just getting an idea of, and I'm going to leave this open to whoever wants to ask this question, or actually I'd love to hear from all of you about, when we talk about reframing to think bigger, what does that represent to you?
When I think about reframing to think bigger, what do I think about? My voice travels, so can you guys hear me okay?
There you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
all right. When I think about reframing it to think bigger is I don't know. Are you thinking big enough? Is this transformative? I also think in terms of my own discomfort, because to think big is to really put yourself in an incredibly uncomfortable, difficult position. So I also look at the challenge and the hardship and the scope and size of the, potentially the problem. So I reframe it in terms of not just big in size, but also what that means from a challenge and hardship and potential growth opportunity that you have to go through to kind of get to that other side, willingness to do that.
Great.
Sorry, I have a little cough. Reframing the thinking big. I don't know. There's a question that I ask founders sometimes when they're applying to Techstars or if we're looking at them for investment. And the question is, it's really very simple. It's, if you magically had 1,000 world-class engineers right now, 1,000 world-class employees in your company, and you had, like $100 million or something, a lot of cash, like, would your vision still be relevant? Like, would the thing you're trying to do still be hard? And oftentimes the answer is no. That people say, well, I would just take the money and run, or I would like sell all their computers and be rich, right? But obviously the right answer is yes. It would still be hard. It would still be like almost impossible to like achieve the thing I'm trying to achieve because it's so difficult, it's so ambitious, it's so impactful that even 1,000 really great people isn't enough. And so I think that's a litmus test you can use to kind of get a sense of like, am I pursuing something that's important enough? And there are reasons why I think that's important, and in fact, actually, why doing harder things like is maybe easier to do than doing easy things, and we can talk about that more later.
Yeah, I guess actually I was just thinking about this as you were talking. Kind of going along with that is kind of part of the reframing process is just kind of rethinking what your end goal is. And in fact, I'm just going through that right now. Earlier this year, I took over a project in Panama that's basically building an eco-resort in a rainforest in the center of Panama. Totally not technology related, obviously. And the project's been going on for about 2 years. And when I took it over, I kind of had to ask them, well, what are you working on right now? Well, we're working at launching this experiential tourism business. I said, okay, similar kind of thing. Magic wand, boom, it's ready today. Then what? What are you going to do? Where does that get you? It turns out, oh, we hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, if that was in place already, well, I guess then we'd start an eco-resort. It's like, okay, boom, magic, it's done. Then what are you going to do? It's like, well, I guess we would use that, the profits from that, to help preserve the other 10,000 acres of our preserve. It's like, okay, boom, then what? It's like, well, that's only a third of the valley, so I guess we would try preserving the whole valley. It's like, okay, if you achieve that, then what? And obviously this took a few weeks to get the management team through this whole thing. It turns out what they actually want to do is create a new innovative model for using for-profit activities for conservation purposes. And that'd be a unique model throughout the world. And if they could pull it off in the center of Panama, it would actually be exportable to a lot of other areas around the world. And when they realized that, they're like, oh, we got a lot of work to do, right? And there's a lot thinking a lot bigger, thinking globally rather than just trying to get through this initial tourism business that they were doing. So I don't know if that helps, but similar kind of thing. If you had all the resources, would it still be hard? And if not, then you got to reframe and set up a different objective.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're wanting to get at, I think you covered this pretty well, is sometimes we think big is big enough. Like I think Rachel, you mentioned this, right? I mean, it's the scope might seem really large. I want to tackle the world, but is that even the right frame to think about what big means, or is it transformational, or is it, is it hard? What does that mean in terms of the right kind of framing of thinking along those particular lines? Well, let's jump to the next thing, which is, we get this question a lot, which is, a lot of entrepreneurship, being a startup founder, very big deal, very hot. Do you have any thoughts about whether someone should be an entrepreneur or not to even go down this path?
How
I
many
think all of
discussions
you
have we had about this? We'll be here for a while. Yes, as you know, I've got a lot of strong opinions on this, but I've over the last 19 years, I've started 7 for-profit companies, 3 nonprofit organizations. And I've been either a mentor, an advisor, a board member, or whatever on dozens of others, and I've met with a lot of prospective and budding entrepreneurs, and I'd say 98% of the time I spend a lot of time trying to talk people out of doing it. And I think I probably talk more people out of doing their startups than actually helping them with their startups. And in a way, I hope that I'm actually doing them a service, because startups are really hard. You guys probably working in them, you know it already. Being a founder of a startup is something that's hard to describe to people unless you actually go through it. It's incredibly difficult, and it's, I don't know what the statistic is, 90, 95, 98% of startups all fail. So, I mean, what other human endeavor do you do where you sacrifice so much, knowing before you get into it that you're probably going to fail and not achieve your goals? So, I think I guess the one quality I would find in an entrepreneur before they do it is to make sure that you're going into it with eyes wide open and knowing exactly what you're getting into.
I appreciate
I'd be
that.
there for hours.
Yeah, no, I know. Anybody else have anything else that wanted to kind of add to that?
I
Covered pretty well.
agree with all that, and as Guillermo said, we could talk a lot longer about these qualities. I'll take a little bit different approach to it and say that I think it's important to be clear about what type of entrepreneur you want to be and what type of company you want to start. I think as we talk about the community here in Atlanta, I think frankly one of the biggest problems that we have is that we have invested so much time and resources into trying to foster hyper-growth technology startups when really people want to build something other than that. And the way you build a hyper-growth technology company is very different than the way you build a small or medium business. As Guillermo said, it's incredibly difficult. It's almost impossible, basically, to build a hyper-growth technology company. It's like pretty possible to build a small or medium business, and so, and there's a spectrum here, of course. And so I think, you do yourself a disservice if you confuse the nature of what you want to do with something else, because you then pursue a certain set of tactics and funding strategy and hiring strategy, all these things that are wrong for you. And both of them are equally valuable. You can get very rich owning a great company, that never took venture capital, or that never built any, innovative technology. And you can also, become very crazy trying to, build Facebook. So just know what you want to do, right? And then make sure that you kind of, live in that, and kind of approach the world in that way versus conflating, what I might be doing with what, he may be doing, because they're different.
So Rachel, as you answer probably this question, what about how do you know if an idea is big enough, or someone you've been ideating on a lot of this as well as we were talking about just beforehand? How does someone consider an idea large enough, or have you seen, or what are some of the challenges when people were ideating on those potential options to start something that you should suggest?
That's a good question. I think it piggybacks a little bit to what Tyler was talking about. I mean, a hypergrowth company, if you're going to take venture money and you're going, you have to think about your market impact in the billions. If you look at what a payoff needs to be for the venture market, I think you have to think about the impact of how many people, the size of your market. Is this $1 billion game? Is this a multi-billion-dollar game? Right? What's the size game you're going to make? Because your investors, especially if you're going to go after some of the bigger guys and you're going after those bigger checks, you've got to kind of think about it from their terms, from their payoff, from their bets, and the type of return they're looking to get, right? And so to make it to that hyper growth, you're talking pretty big. You've got to really. I think the one thing I would say is, regardless of which path you choose in life, the way Tyler framed it, because there are different paths you can take. The one characteristic I would say, especially, regardless of whether you go big or go in any of those places, you got to go all in, especially if you're going to go big, because the obstacles are so high. The challenges are going to be so steep that you have to be it's not even a question. You have to be crazy committed, to the point where people think people will talk you out of it, and most likely they will. The bigger the idea, I think the more people will talk you out of it. So you have to be really crazy committed. I think the bigger the idea, the more committed you have to be. I mean, it's tough to dip your toes and kind of be have it.
So Tyler, you were talking about, I remember we had this conversation about breaking through. So what are some of the stagnation problems an early stage company has had that you've seen that you could share about what needs to be thought through in terms of overcoming that stagnation problem, or that sort of transparent ceiling problem that might occur for an early stage company?
I want to make sure I focus on the right thing, because
sure.
we can talk a lot about the top 50 problems that founders face, right? That's what you're asking.
No,
I think it's
no,
more about
necessarily, just-
vision and I don't know. I'll tell you, a quick story, which is that when my prior company, I didn't found it, but a company called Palantir was founded. It's founded by Peter Thiel, who's kind of now famous, and at the time, like literally not a single venture investor in Silicon Valley, for that matter, in the world, was willing to invest in this company. They all said no. And if you go into the offices of all, Sequoia and Greylock and Andreessen and all these guys now, you will see, pretty much every, great, not pretty much, exactly every great company in Silicon Valley on their walls, on some of their walls. You will not see Palantir on a single one of them. Any of them. And so the reason I bring that up is because, and I think every company faces this type of adversity to some extent, is, people are going to tell you you're crazy. And as Anand said, I mean, it's a fact, right? And I think the thing about it is, you actually, in order to pursue, we keep using this term, hypergrowth technology companies. In order to try to build such a company, you really have to be a little crazy. But the trick to it is that you've got to convince not the world, but like 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 people that you actually are really smart. That's all you got to do. And the way this works is that as you have this idea, you convince Anand that actually it's a really good idea. Anand's very smart. Each time that happens, that crazy thing becomes less crazy. And before you know it, the world's like, oh man, like they're actually doing that crazy thing that like I thought was impossible, because now they have 1,000 really smart people who all believe it's possible, and they're doing it, just before my eyes. And so that's kind of what you got to do, right? And so I guess to answer your question, like what you can't do is you can't worry about what people think. You can't try to adjust your vision to fit reason as it exists today, because like it's probably wrong. And you have to just push through, and you have to work really, really hard to identify the very small number of people in the world who will actually like believe in you and actually believe in your vision, and who'll sign up. And you got to do that over and over again. But the good news is it gets easier as you go forward.
So let's dive in a little bit more into the specifics. Let's say you have a company, you're rolling with it, you've got your 10 unaffiliated customers, sort of rule of thumb of making sure that you've validated your MVP, you've got your MVP in place, you've got a handful of people. Where do most companies just fall over right after that? Because once you've achieved that level, maybe you've got a place in ATV, maybe you've got a place in Tech Square or some other place. Where do most people start to fall off in terms of after that? Rachel? Yeah, go ahead.
I think honestly, one of my biggest things that I see, and I've mentored before I took my position today, I founded my own company. Before I became CEO of UserIQ, I mentored a lot of startups here in the community. And one of the things I observed is like just good old-fashioned sales. I'll be honest with you, one of the things that shocks me is these really smart, talented developers, founders that are doing amazing product market fit. They're talking, they're discovering, they're building, they're iterating, they're pivoting, they're studying everything, and just good old-fashioned selling. I'm really impressed at how many sales tools we have out there now. We've got cadence softwares and lead softwares, and we got all these tools that kind of can help us in the sales process. But sometimes, I grew up, when I started my first company, I had a cell phone, and I had my desk, and I had, the phone book. Like, I don't even think LinkedIn was out there, and there's just this whole practice of just talking to people and selling your product. And sometimes I think we hide now behind so much process and tools and best practices that sometimes I tell a lot of these founders, like, when was the last time you pitched your product? Like, when was the last time you just got out there and sold it, And literally, it would be weeks, because they've been so focused on all these things that they have to do. And sometimes I'm like, just get out there and like test it. Just get out there and put a price on it and just start selling it and learn that way, as opposed to like, I think you can get paralyzed and complacent a little bit in your what's the word, in your desire to keep iterating. You keep iterating, but at some point you got to get it out there. And sometimes I think there's just some great stuff. And the biggest thing that's keeping folks from actually moving is just sales. And a lot of these folks just don't have good sales background. Sometimes I think the tools have actually helped us become not as good salespeople. Like just the basics, like how do you just call someone? How do you just do a good presentation? How do you communicate your business value? Like just the raw sales skills that, that you just do to get business, right? Or to get someone interested. I'm shocked at sometimes the companies have so much amazing stuff going on, and the one thing they're not doing is just the basic sales stuff. That would be one of the things I've.
And can you is it something where, there's obviously a fear factor as part of that, or maybe a comfort level, but how does someone overcome that in terms of just getting out there and doing that? Do you have any thoughts or suggestions?
What?
Hire Rachel.
I think, I'm very old school in that respect. I think it's being public and setting goals for yourself and kind of driving yourself to do it and say, I'm gonna go meet with, and really, sometimes you need external people. That's where a board or mentors really come in handy, but holding yourself accountable to get in front of a number of people and just pitch, actually go out and sell, put sales goals, even if they're crazy sales goals, even if you don't know if anyone's gonna pay for this product. You'd be better off putting something and saying, we're going to try to close 2 customers this month at this price. Fine, try it. But you have to kind of publicly put it out there. And I think some of these companies I deal with, they're like, well, we're pre-revenue. Okay. I don't know, go out there and give it a shot. I think publicly putting it out there is part of the process.
Obviously we're in the midst of, I was actually did you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe.
Gonna ask
That's
you
all
next.
right.
Yeah,
Because
please do.
I
Go
kind
ahead.
of.
I get passionate about that topic.
Well, no,
No,
but
I
I
love
kind of
it. I
half
love it.
joked about hiring Rachel, but that was when you asked the question. That was actually what I was going to answer. Was not to hire Rachel specifically, but when you asked if you got your first few customers and then where did companies fall down after that, I think the problem that I've seen a lot of companies do, whether it's at that stage or not, is the founder needs to know his or her limitations and needs to know what their strengths are, and be able to have the right people around them to get to the next stage. So for example, sales is not my strong suit. So if I get to that point, I have to make sure I have a Rachel on board. Or even your current experience at User IQ, right? You're not the founder of User IQ, but the founder of User IQ is good with products, right? So now he's in charge of product, and now Rachel's taking everything to the next level. And I think that's really hard for a founder to do for 2 reasons. One is there's ego involved. It's your baby. You've been nurturing this company, and admitting that you're not good at something and you've got to turn it over to somebody else is really, really difficult thing to do. It requires a bit of maturity or desperation, one or the other. But the other big thing, a tactical thing, is at that point, if you don't have, like in User IQ's example, Rachel on board yet, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. You don't have time. You know you need a Rachel, but you don't have time to go hire Rachel. So how do you do that? And you've got to find a way of getting past that. For example, this Panamanian eco resort company, the finances were in shambles when I got there in January. Finance is not my strong suit either. So I was up to my eyeballs in QuickBooks and financials and the board and all this other stuff. I had to get a controller on board. I didn't have time to interview a controller or find a controller, but I just had to bite the bullet and figure out how to do it. We finally got a controller on board about 2 months ago, and even today, I'm not in Panama. She's dealing with a bunch of stuff down there. I just get a couple emails and I'm done. So I think part of it is the founder knowing their limitations and being able to get out of their own way.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to ask too is, I know you're a lot in non-technology arenas. What could, and being that this is the 4th largest tech hub, yes, sorry, the pitch there, but in the in the co-working space in the United States, being focused around tech, what can other industries, what can people borrow from other industries that they could apply here in terms of the more complexities, the growth challenges?
Yeah, right now I'm not dealing with technology, but my first startup was a speech recognition technology company in Silicon Valley. So I started in technology, and most of the startups I've worked with have been technology related. I think the biggest thing, especially when we're talking about dreaming big or thinking big or getting big, I think tech entrepreneurs tend to get too focused on the technology itself as opposed to the implications of what that technology enables. And if you can get yourself, and I think that's maybe why it's good that the founder of User IQ brought in someone else so he could focus on the product, so that someone else can focus on the larger impact of the technology. Our first company, the the first company I did, we did speech recognition enabling web interfaces. This is back in 1998, 99, so it's like, it was all new back then. And we were so enamored with what you could do with this thing. You know, I'd have my engineers going, look, 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 you can call the phone and you can speak into it and it pops up on the screen. You know, it predates Siri by a lot. And he was so excited about all that stuff, but we started trying to think of, well, what would it mean if all of a sudden you didn't have to touch a keyboard to interact with a computer? What could that enable? So anyway, I don't remember what your question was.
It was originally just what to borrow from other industries.
Yeah,
right?
so what to borrow from other industries is just looking at what other problems everyone's trying to solve. I think one of the nice things about technology entrepreneurs and technology startups is if you get outside of technology and just look at the whole world, technology can help solve a lot of different problems. Actually, we did that in 2009, I co-founded a company that designs, builds, and operates deep diving manned submersibles. So in a way, it's a technology company, big hardware technology company. We wanted to be the SpaceX of the oceans, make human access to the deep oceans more affordable. And the big reason we've been successful with that is because the two co-founders did not come from the ocean exploration world. We came from technology backgrounds, and we just looked at ocean exploration and figured, okay, if we took a technology approach to this, how could we help solve their problems? I don't know if that helps, but
yeah, absolutely. So Tyler, you know, obviously running Techstars, you're seeing a lot of companies, not only from interviewing them, seeing the applications, having them go through the gambit, working with mentors. Tell us a little bit about, say, the art of the pivot, you know, as part of the reframing process or thinking bigger. Now they've gone through the accelerator. Some may continue with their initial product idea. Maybe they've changed their market. Can you talk about maybe one or two that you know, may have needed to make some significant change as a result of not only what the founder initially wanted and versus what they went to market with?
Sure. I don't know if I'll cite examples just because I mean, it may be less helpful, but just some general thoughts on this. I think the root of success as it relates to pivots is listening, and kind of further therein, like it's about self-awareness. You know, it's like do you know what you don't know, or at least are you aware that you don't know things? And I actually think this is like one of the kind of foundational traits of really successful founders is the ability to hear things outside of their own head. And of course, you guys hear that all the time. This is like not a new concept, and yet like so few of us actually do this. And especially when it comes to you know, products that we love and that we think are great or that we want the world to love. But we have to, and I talked earlier about, you know, having this really big vision and like people, you know, not listening to people when they tell you that it's a bad idea and so on and so forth, which is kind of at odds with the notion of like listening to people when they tell you it's a bad idea. And so how do you, you know, where do you draw the line between these two things? And you know, I think I think there's a difference between it's a nuanced thing, but there's a difference between someone or rather not someone, but many people telling you that the thing you're doing they don't want, versus telling you, or the way you're doing it they don't want done for them, versus them telling you that, you know, kind of that there's like some there's some foundational problem with your approach, or there's some foundational problem with the general space in which you're operating, and so you really have to like, you know, dig pretty deep to like hear the right message. Another part of this is that most people aren't going to tell you the truth. This is like actually a really important thing to know. Even up to like your friends, you know, they're probably not going to tell you the truth about most things in life. And so, you know, most of the truths you will learn, like you'll discover on your own, you know, or through people who are just really, really, really honest. And so, I think like as a founder, you know, as you are, you know, seeking out the truth, in particular about your product and about if like people want it, you really have to ask hard questions, like ask the right questions that are going to produce like the right answers, honest answer, versus asking what you want to hear. And there are whole books about this you guys can read about like how do you do that technically. But beyond the technicalities of it, I think a lot of it just like starts in your own heart, and like, do you actually want to know what people really think? And if you do, then it's pretty easy to find it, and if you don't, it's like really easy to avoid it. So you have to just ask yourself that question, and then get to it. Yeah.
Good. No, please take the mic though.
I was curious, like in Techstars, right? So having not gone through the program myself, but one of the obviously the benefits is you're surrounded by you're in this intense program, you're in this community where you're, to your point, you're really trying to drive that behavior for people who may not have had that rigor before, and you're doing it in a very reinforcing way through the mentorship and the just this intensive kind of making having people kind of move in that way that may be uncomfortable for them. To your point, building that self-awareness. Do you find that post-program, is that where people struggle the most? Like, what I'm curious to know is when the program's over, when you think about those companies that then struggle afterwards, is there a pattern? Like, Michael, do you guys think about what some of those obstacles are when all the kind of the program ends and it's just you're back to, you know what I'm saying? I'm just curious, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that's one of the great things about what a Techstars, I think, brings to entrepreneurs. One of the many things that the program brings, of course, but do you find is that one of the issues when it's done?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think obviously there are many reasons why companies like fail, right? But my view on this is actually like really simple, which is that if you take a person that is unwilling to fail, right? That they're literally willing to spend their entire life working on something and absorb all of the pain that comes from that. So the commitment piece that we've talked about, it's hard, right? And that person is pursuing, and they're reasonably smart, not a genius, just reasonably smart, and they're operating in a really big market. And most importantly, if they have a constant focus on getting to the truth, the correct answer, right, then they will be successful, almost by definition. If you do those things, you will eventually succeed. And so, if we kind of forget all the other more practical reasons why you can fail, I think the biggest one is that, to your point, founders don't, they live in their heads. They don't actually try to live in the world. They don't actually try to, establish empathy for their customers and understand their own strengths and weaknesses and build around those things and so on and so forth. And so, the thing that we try to, kind of push on most in Techstars, and that is more difficult once you leave, is that, right? Is we're having this conversation about, your product or this customer or this founder or whatever, but are we actually talking about the real thing? Are you actually making an honest effort to get to the true answer? And oftentimes the answer is no. And it's especially more difficult when you lose that community of people who push you in that direction. So that's part of why Techstars is valuable. It's also part of why this mentorship program is valuable. But it's only useful if you actually ask the mentors to, tell you the truth.
So Guillermo, what embodies someone who really is thinking bigger? Can you describe some traits about an individual who really can get outside of their head? What are they doing on a daily basis, or how are they acting? How are they talking about? Can you describe a couple of things about maybe what some of us should consider trying to do, or surround people that are doing that, whatever that may be?
Let's see here. I think the most successful big thinking entrepreneurs I've been involved with are very restless, and they really want to make sure that whatever it is that they're doing is worth their time and effort, and that it's going to make a difference. And they have varying different definitions of what it means to make a difference. Like I was saying earlier, even with the eco resort in Panama, it was a matter of working through a process with the founders to see how big of an impact do they really want to make. It was interesting. I can't remember if you asked how do you know if you're dreaming big enough or not? But I was thinking that in relation to this question, how different entrepreneurs that I've talked about have different definitions of how they're going to measure their success if they're dreaming big enough. The first startup that I did in 1998, the speech recognition company, keeping in mind it was Silicon Valley, height of the internet boom, my co-founder's metric for success was us, well, mostly him, but us being on the cover of Time magazine. Like that's how he knew that we would have succeeded. So every day we were doing stuff like, are we getting to that point where we're going to be on the cover of Time magazine? Are enough people going to care that Time would put us on the cover of Time magazine? And actually, that's actually how we pivoted to speech recognition. We actually started just as a Java development shop. And we realized no one's going to put us on the cover of Time magazine for building a Java app. But building out a speech recognition interface to a Java backend, that back then, someone would put us on the cover of Time magazine. So every day we were trying to strive for that. I kind of took that on a little bit. So 10 years ago now, I started an angel investor group that focused on early stage space companies. So we were, as a group, investing in very early stage. This is right about the time when Elon Musk was starting SpaceX and Richard Branson was starting Virgin Galactic. And one of the things that drove us was thinking ahead. 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, when somebody writes a book about the new space revolution that happened in the 21st century, yes, there's going to be a chapter on Elon Musk. Yes, there's going to be a chapter on Richard Branson. But there has to be a chapter on early stage capital, whether it's Steve Jurvetson and Draper Fisher Jurvetson making investment in SpaceX or Founders Fund or whatever it is. There's going to be a chapter on early stage capital. And when they write that chapter, is our group, Space Angels Network, going to be included in that chapter? Even if our names weren't in it, at least the organization would be in it. And that drove us the whole time. Every day we were thinking, is what we're doing today actually going to get us to the point where we deserve that mention in the chapter of that book 20 years from now? And that drove us really on a daily basis. So I think most big thinking entrepreneurs, every day they're thinking, am I making a difference to get to that ultimate goal?
Yeah, go ahead and keep the mic. I was going to ask everybody here real quick, as we're going to do a couple more questions and then open it up. But when you think of somebody who does think big, who is that, and briefly why?
The biggest thinker I know? That I know personally? Or?
Oh, no, just anybody that you... it could be somebody you know personally. I know you know a lot of people.
Yeah, well, until Elon started having success with SpaceX, I would have said Peter Diamandis. He's built so many... He's a serial big thinking entrepreneur. He's built for-profit, non-profit around the world. In large part, I think his success laid the groundwork for Elon Musk. So I think Elon's probably the biggest thinking entrepreneur I would think of.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give him that as well. I think he'll be looked back upon as, Albert Einstein of our generation here. But in people that I know, kind of very personally, I'm good friends with the founders of a company called Stripe. Many of you guys probably use them if you're actually making money. Hopefully you're making money in your businesses. And I was there when they seemed to conceive of this idea and kind of said, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go and we're gonna build the payment network of the future, and everyone in the world is gonna use it in like 20 years. Which is a incredibly audacious and kind of crazy thing to say, but I watched them do this from that point to where they are today, and they'll continue. And so I wouldn't say that they're like the ambitious or whatever, I forget what you said, but in terms of having observed it, right, and actually seeing how this comes together, firsthand, incredibly impressive, and it kind of proves to me that it's doable, and I derive a lot of insight from having watched their approach.
So it's kind of an interesting segue to thinking big, but I had the good fortune of working for Dr. John Kelly, who is the godfather of Watson, right before I left IBM, and it's a really interesting story how I ended up working for John Kelly. I wrote a letter to Ginny Rometty, who's the CEO of IBM, which my husband thought I was crazy, but I wrote a 3-page letter to the chairman of IBM on the things that I would do if I were her and things that I would do differently coming in as an acquired executive. And long story short, I didn't think the letter would be read. It was read. The next thing I know, I was on a private jet to IBM pitching some of my ideas to Ginny and the senior executives at IBM, and then I ended up getting a position under John. That's a long story, but I think the lesson in that is if you're a big thinker, go seek out other big thinkers and don't be shy to share your ideas. Like, you might sound crazy. I will never forget my husband when I was typing this letter. He's like, you could get, this is gonna go nowhere. This is not gonna get past like a secretary. But he was encouraging me. He's like, write it, but just know what you're, And I remember rereading it and saying, do I press the send button? Do I not press the send button? Where will this even go? Long story short, it got to her, and I ended up working on some very interesting projects as a result. So one lesson is, if you're a big thinker, don't be shy, reach out to big thinkers. There's lots of big thinkers out, and they like to hear from you. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, that person would never respond to my blog, or that person would never respond to my email. You'd be surprised. Big thinkers are lonely people. If you've got a really big idea and you think you could help them, or if you have something interesting to say to them, it gave me the courage. I've since reached out to a lot of big notaries and introduced myself and gave them ideas. I've gotten a response 50% of the time, which is kind of interesting.
It's very true. You hit a story a lot. I have my own little story. It's not as cool as yours, but I just want to reinforce the point, right? It's like, I did a very similar thing when I joined Palantir in 2009, and I my wife did the same thing as your husband. And what was interesting about this was I later, ended up, among other things, being responsible for all of our recruiting and all of our HR and all this stuff. And, saw tens of thousands, literally, of people come and interview. And, we got our fair share of wackos who send letters, but, you just throw them in the garbage. But I don't think I actually ever, in a single one of those, tens of thousands of people that came and went, saw someone do what I did. I would not say that I was special, but I just didn't, right? And so, to your point, I think big thinkers are lonely. It's very true. And if you have a credible thing to say, then you should go say it, and there's a good chance they'll listen to you.
Surprise. But back to the big thinker. So I would say I've had the privilege of seeing Watson firsthand and understanding Watson's evolution. This is also a really interesting concept. Big thinkers are not necessarily big executors. And I actually think they're some of the biggest thinkers inside of IBM. And I never would have thought, if you would have asked me if I would look at IBM, which a lot of people associate now with outdated, dinosaur, 15 quarters of straight losses. There's many points that could be conjured up when you think of IBM. I will tell you, there's some of the most brilliant thinkers inside of IBM. And I actually think Watson is truly one of the most disruptive technologies out there today. Unfortunately, it's also a lesson that you can think big, but if you don't execute well, it really doesn't matter. And IBM is actually one of the big proof points, because here's a company that should have all the resources, all the global reach, some amazing technical talent to pull it off. And frankly, I think they're struggling. I'm frankly rooting for Watson because I really believe in it and I've seen it. It's the real deal. When you talk about buzzwords like AI, I've really seen Watson at work in some very interesting ways, particularly in things like cancer research and in healthcare. But I also think that execution is really the biggest difference. And if you can't execute, that also shows back to, if you have 1,000 engineers, talk about 100,000 engineers, right? How do you execute really well? And I think execution, there's a big difference. There's a saying, right? There's a difference between an idea and, whatever. But anyway, it comes, there's that. Anyway, but execution, sorry, I wish I had that brilliant statement to say. But execution really, is probably the biggest thing between any big idea, right? And reality is, can you execute? Can you make it? Can you sell it? I think, honestly, IBM has had difficulty selling Watson into the marketplace, and there's a lot of reasons why.
For the developers out there, I keep thinking and imagining the mythical man month. If any of you ever read that book about the more people you put onto something, the less likely it's actually going to progress, just because of the complexity. Anyway, long story short, that's what made me think about a lot of that. But at any rate, no, it's great wisdom about execution. So the last question, I think, and we'll open it up to everybody. Aside from funding, and as a matter of fact, the next session will be on funding and thinking big about funding for in September, which is a commonplace problem in the Atlanta ecosystem. What is the next thing that the Atlanta ecosystem needs to elevate our stature as a startup ecosystem?
What do you think Atlanta needs?
What do we need? We already talked about funding is always a restriction, like a kind of a cap.
Yeah.
But,
I have a simple answer for this one. Atlanta needs a really big exit. It's very simple. Like the way that the Silicon Valley becomes Silicon Valley is you have the compounding benefit of many very successful companies, right? You have one that's dear to my heart. You have PayPal, right? Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and PayPal begets the first investment in Facebook, right? And that begets the first investment in Palantir, and that begets the first investment in LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. And now you begin to see the respective mafias of those companies emerge and create the next batch of companies. This is how it works, and so and it works really well because when you are part of a PayPal or you're part of a Facebook, you're part of a Palantir, you have two things as a person that worked there. You have the experience of having sort of really amazing founders build a great company and being part of that, and all of the entrepreneurial skill that comes from that. And you have most likely some money, right? And so you can use that money to invest in things. You can use that money to take risk on your own, to start things. You can do lots of stuff. And so that's how it works. And so here we have had a decent, relatively decent number of exits. Unfortunately, I think the nature of those exits has been different than what we really need in order to kind of to kick off the hyper growth community, if you will. So hopefully, I think we have some of those companies kind of in the making. I'm not saying it's gonna happen next year, but I think in the next 10 years, and a single $1 billion exit that created liquidity amongst lots of really talented people would completely transform the city.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. So I haven't lived in Silicon Valley since 2001, so I left 15 plus years ago. And since then I've lived in the DC area, in Seattle, South Florida, and now Atlanta, so I moved here about 4 years ago. In all those places, and I've traveled to other places, but in all those places, everyone's trying to recreate Silicon Valley, which I was trying to encourage people not to do. You have to be yourself. Silicon Valley is unique. But to create a successful entrepreneurial ecosystem, what Silicon Valley has in spades is success stories. But it's not just any success story, as Tyler was saying. So when I got here was right when David was selling
Pardot,
right. So that was the big thing. So I knew that a community needed a success story. So when I got here and I saw all the press around David's exit and all the great stuff he was doing setting up ATV, I thought, oh great, Atlanta's got a great success story. The problem from a Atlanta ecosystem standpoint is Pardot was not set up to create a mafia, or not set up in a way that would create the Pardot mafia going out and investing and starting other companies. So that was a great success story, and it gave us a lot of good press and a lot of good PR. But what we need are those next successes, and they don't have to be huge successes. Although $1 billion exit would be amazing, they don't have to be huge successes, but there have to be enough of them and enough decent size to spin off other entrepreneurs and other investors, angel investors, from that.
Yeah, can I, now that, so you've spun it up, so I'll speak very openly about an issue that's kind of some underneath that. So then begs the question, okay, how do you get more of that? And I think that one thing I'll say openly is I have an issue. I think that there's not enough people, especially at my age, I turned 44 last week, who have come out of successful exits, right? Whether I've started companies that came out of an acquisition, that want to think big, want to play big, have a lot of bruises, but are also willing to forego the income to do it. I'll be honest with you, I wish that there's, the reality is in Atlanta, there is not as much pre-revenue investment, or there is, but not necessarily, you have to have the stomach and you have to have the commitment to really want to build something big and balance that out with the paycheck and the compensation. And I think that I'm sometimes shocked at the talent and caliber of people that conceptually want to build something big, but they want a $250,000 salary, they want, this and that, and they want all the comforts of a job with all the adventure and, of that. And that's what's really hard in Atlanta. And personally, as I see companies being built, is how do you do that when you need really good talent, you need senior talent. I'm not saying you don't need older people like myself. You need young. You need people from different perspectives and experiences. But how do you do that when the reality is cash is not plentiful, and you're not going to be able to raise a 10 million pre-revenue round, where you can then, buy yourself 5 years of market, whatever that might be. And so I think there's this challenge, I think, in people who conceptually want to play the game, but need a lot of infrastructure, and aren't necessarily willing to make that commitment. I think that's personally a challenge I find in Atlanta. I don't know if you see that.
Yeah.
I think that's just,
For sure. I mean, I'll tell you, I actually, myself, I've never made more than $125,000 a year in my salary, to this day. I'm 34 years old now, and I actually will never will, unless I pay it to myself. Obviously, I've made up for it, right? But like, even at Palantir, we had a policy. We didn't. The max salary we paid anyone was $130,000, and that was it. And if you weren't willing to do that, if you couldn't do that, it just wasn't for you. And of course, people, it worked out fine. But like, this is a huge issue here in Atlanta, and you guys should take it seriously for yourselves. And what I say to people is like, if I'm hiring you, I want to pay you enough money that you can live a comfortable life. To me, comfortable means you have a clean bed, and you can like take one vacation a year to like Disney World or something like that, or lake somewhere. No retirement savings. That is not part of comfort. No luxuries, right? It's like, it's comfortable, and if you work hard and we're successful, then you can live an extravagant life if you want to. But like today, that's not the case, right? And so it's big challenge.
So my name is Anand Talker. I just realized I did not even introduce myself, but one of the things, I'm big in MarTech, but I'm a founder here and doing some really interesting work on decision making, but also a lead advocate for the Mentor and Advisor program. We have a great one for all the villagers here. We're very deliberate about not just putting people out there and expecting magic to happen. Take advantage of it. Try to find ways to help people who can inspire you to think big, find outside perspectives, get you connected, and get you driven to your next big thing, and hopefully aim for that next $1 billion exit that we can make some great noise here in Atlanta. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the afternoon.